Okay, let's begin. Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this session. We're going to have a presentation from the wonderful Her Grace Mother Aruddha Devi, on the topic of studying Srimad Bhagavatam with our children, reading Srimad Bhagavatam with our children. Mother Aruddha is a disciple of His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami. She is the wife to Anantarupa, and she's the mother of two wonderful children who are now grown-up children, Radhika Raman Prabhu and Gopal Hari Prabhu. I had the really good fortune of having a train ride with Gopal Hari Prabhu from Radhadesh back to London. There was a group of us there, and we spoke at length about his experiences in homeschooling, his experiences of being immersed in an atmosphere of wanting to read and study Srimad Bhagavatam. And everything was, what he shared was so insightful because it was so positive and uplifting. It's really easy as parents in our generation especially to get excited about something, but sometimes we don't know until we see the fruits of the tree. When I was interacting with Gopal Hari, he was nothing short of a gentleman and someone who seemed so enthusiastic about Krishna consciousness, and it was a real honor to speak to him about his experiences. And I don't really know Radhika Raman Prabhu so well. So after raising her children in this beautiful environment, eventually Mother Aruddha was getting more and more requests for insights on training our children on the culture of the Bhagavatam, insights on how to read with them, and very real and raw conversations. What do you do if your child doesn't want to sit down? How do we present it? What if as a mother we feel we don't have time? So over time, she's been accumulating presentations. She started a long-term project to write a curriculum to present the Bhagavatam with, which is for everybody, not just for home educated children, but whatever your choice of education, something that you can invite into your home. She compiled the work of and coordinated large groups of mothers who across the world were putting together this piece by piece curriculum. Mother Aruddha also released this wonderful book, Homeschooling Krishna's Children. And even if you're not homeschooling, I would highly recommend this book. I read it when it first came out, and I read it again when lockdown started. I felt like I needed the advice. And it's just full of honest insights, full of just good practical advice. And I'm really excited that we have her here in person today. Thank you, Aruddha Mataji, for joining us. And I will now hand over to you. Oh, I'll just quickly explain. So Mother Aruddha will do the presentation, and then we will have questions and answers at the end. Yeah, I think that's it. If you need anything in between, just you can chat me online. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Svarna Radhika Mataji, thank you for such a warm welcome. And I'm really excited to be here with so many devotees in mostly probably in London, and really excited to present this workshop that that is very really the heart of the mission of Prabhupada. So this seminar will be divided into 3 parts. The first part will talk about the spiritual benefits to studying Srimad Bhagavatam with our children. Second will be the academic benefits, and then the third will be the methodology that I adopted with my own children, but now is being practiced by many, many devotees around the world. And I will also talk about how to teach Bhagavatam, with different age groups. And then I will provide some resources that we as a team have collected, and then open it up for questions. So I will begin my presentation by presenting a PowerPoint show to you. There we go. Okay. So I want to begin by sharing this beautiful quote of Prabhupada Prabhupada actually wanted our children to study English and Sanskrit just so they could read his books. So this is one of the just very few quotes, of the many, many quotes that Prabhupada has spoken in regards to the importance of children reading Srimad Bhagavatam. So please listen carefully. Our students specifically, they should take care of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. We have therefore prescribed in our school, Dallas, and from the very beginning, if they begin education with Bhagavad Gita and then come to Srimad Bhagavatam and read the whole literature, then they will be more than MA, PhD. Even astronomy, astrology, politics, sociology, atomic theory, everything is there. Therefore, if you study Srimad Bhagavatam very carefully, then you get all knowledge completely. Throughout the whole world, whatever knowledge is there is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If one simply reads the Srimad Bhagavatam, his education is topmost. If one studies Srimad Bhagavatam, he is well versed in every subject matter. So some of the very notable points here is that Prabhupada is stressing the fact that if we read Srimad Bhagavatam, then the children will get all knowledge. And he's also specifying what kind of knowledge. In other quotes, he's even specified even further topics that is covered in Srimad Bhagavatam, topics such as history, science, and anthropology, which can be. And why do we need to teach our children Srimad Bhagavatam before we introduce other subjects? It's because in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is a Vedic perspective, which is much more wholesome and beneficial, and it sets the foundation for the future of our children. Once they studied these subject matters from Srimad Bhagavatam, when they go out into the world and they have to study the mundane subjects, they have such a good perspectives, such a good foundation in this. In the godly perspective, in the theistic perspective, that they will not be misled into blind thinking, which is very, very prevalent in today's world. We all know that children later on, they have to deal with atheistic and materialistic thinking. And I've seen in my own experience that children do really well when they're growing up as devotees, but as they hit teenagers, they start having doubts. And their faith is shaken just by peer pressure and what they learn in school. So by giving them this foundation, they are on solid ground. They have learned to see things from the godly perspective, from the perspective of Shastra, which is very, very beneficial. For example, the study of history. The way history is presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam is not chronological, but is the life and history of great personalities who show such wonderful qualities of not only of leadership, of the ability to protect their country, but also their emphasis on spreading Krishna consciousness throughout their kingdom. So whereas modern history we see is not about that. It's ultimately, even though historians say that we learn from history, but today we see how the world, Prabhupada says, is just full of chaos and therefore heading towards great calamities. So therefore, when we see these contrasts, we see these examples in the Shastras, our children understand that there's actually a purpose to life. There's a purpose to why we are here, and that is the goal of education, to understand the source. Who is the source of this creation, and what is the purpose? For example, if you take Prabhupada said an example. For example, we take a microphone. If you simply study how the microphone was made and study the parts, we forget to use it for the purpose for which it was created, which, in other words, to magnify sounds. So what is the use, right? So we study the creation, we study all the physical laws that govern this creation, but we forget, but we don't study the source of this creation and the purpose for why it was created, then all our learning would be useless. That's why Prabhupada gave us the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he understood that this is what is going to revolutionize our society, a society that's deeply embedded in materialism. And so in this way, Prabhupada, through the Srimad Bhagavatam, he's covering every subject matter, things like anthropology, the origin of man. I mean, just understand, just to make a point that the origin of man is not from apes or from chemicals, but rather the origin is God, Krishna. And to bring these things to light, Srimad Bhagavatam is very, very helpful. Right, in the beginning, if you give this knowledge, so later on when they have to study these subjects, they are not, shaken, they are not misled. Rather, they get a better universal picture of everything. So Prabhupada, as you know, he went through a lot of austerities to give us knowledge to us. And we all know the story of how he went to Radha Damodar temple and he was translating these books, the first canto, under such austere conditions, and how he brought these books on the ship where he had 2 heart attacks. And even on the ship, he was trying to distribute these books and all the struggles that he faced in America. But he had so much faith that no matter whether a person is eligible or not, this knowledge is going to give people sustenance and hope for the future. And I tried in my own homeschooling, I tried to follow this principle. We read Srimad Bhagavatam every day. It became the basis of our curriculum, the center point of our curriculum. We spent about a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours every day studying it with breaks, and then we would go out and try to practice what we learned by reaching out to others, by giving them Krishna consciousness through different methods. And what I noticed is in about 6 years, this process was actually working. They were gaining both academically and spiritually. And that is when I decided to share this methodology with many others. So I'm going to speak a little bit about spiritual benefits. One of the most important things that children learn from Srimad Bhagavatam is that they get good role models. As we know, children like to imitate their elders or whoever that they see around them. And it is said that, whichever role models we put in front of our children in the first 5 years of their life, you can pretty much predict how they will turn out. Of course, they may have distractions growing up, but yet these first role models that we put before our children is very, very important. Very, very important. As you know, in society today, children they have their own heroes. And oftentimes we see they adopt heroes such as famous athletes or film stars. Some of them may be some good models of people who are living a moral life with good family, but family traditions. But yet we see over time these very models, they fall from our eyes because of giving in to sinful propensities. So the children become very, very confused. They either become very skeptical or they try to follow them with disastrous results. But Krishna conscious role models that children get, where Krishna is in the picture, is something that they can live by with. The role models presented in Srimad Bhagavatam are very, very exemplary. And when children read these stories, they get association with these personalities. The character rubs on them. And as they get older, they start appreciating the instructions. Because the fact of the matter in Srimad Bhagavatam, it says that in this world, there is no pure goodness. Any goodness is always tinged with passion and ignorance. So by reading these role models, we know that these models are perfect. They do not succumb to other modes. So I can give you some examples of how we can teach our children, how we can train them in good character through Srimad Bhagavatam. For example, we see that in the story of Parikshit Maharaj. Now he's an emperor of the world, And the qualities that he shows by example, it's amazing. For example, qualities of humility, tolerance, and good management. How he accepted the curse without retaliation, without reversing the curse, seeing it as the desire of the Lord, and how he tolerates it. But then when he meets Kali, how he deals with him, with the great authority, but yet ready to kill him, because his model is he's very careful in spreading Krishna consciousness among his citizens, and he is ready to do away with all people who are who are going against that principle, but yet he shows compassion when Kali surrenders. So in other words, how a great leader, a great personality can have qualities of tolerance, humility, but yet can be a great leader with fearless, who can actually adopt the principles of good government. So in one personality, we see so many good qualities, and this is what children learn. If we were to teach our children separately and say you should be like this, and you should be a good person, and you should be humble, and you should be grateful, it doesn't stay too long, right? We all know that, because they just don't accept it very submissively. But if it is presented through these stories, then the children are very, they actually imbibe them very deeply through these stories. The story of another story would be the Dhruva story, this quality of gratefulness. If you were to tell our children that, you should be grateful to parents, how we've done so much for you, they don't take it very seriously. But yet, when Dhruva Maharaj showed the quality of gratefulness to his mother, where when he was going back to Godhead in this airplane, and he wanted his mother to be with him to also go, and how Krishna responded to his desire by also showing him that she was already, on her journey back to Godhead. It showed the quality of gratefulness, because he did not forget the first instruction that his mother gave, even though there was a gap of 36,000 years. Such a long period of time had elapsed before when his mother gave him the first instruction of seeking Krishna and taking his shelter through all his troubles. So that quality runs very, very deep, So, and of course, we see in Prahlad the quality of how he tolerated all the atrocities from his father in such a sober way, even though he was a little child. And yet, and Hiranyakashipu, who succumbed to anger, and who was willing to kill his own son. So we learn these qualities so clearly through Srimad Bhagavatam, how a devotee acts and how a demoniac person acts. And that's why we see in the Vedic culture, even 50 years ago in India, influential people were sending their children to Gurukula. Now they had all the money and they had all the power, everything, but yet they were sending their children to Gurukula. Why? Because they understood the importance of teaching our children good characters such as self-control, austerity, tolerance, mercy, and these qualities can only be taught when we study the lives of these pure devotees, and we also study about Krishna, the source of all these qualities. But nowadays, we see people, education simply geared to these learning about, Prabhupada said, how about eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And these are the things he said is innate in us. We don't need to be educated for learning these four principles. In fact, one should learn how to minimize these things and use our time for higher purposes. That's what human life is meant for. The Srimad Bhagavatam goes to the very source. Our whole purpose of life. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? And the nature of this material world. So it goes to the heart of the matter. And without this, Prabhupada said, without learning these things, everything else is like learning the parts without learning the root. So when we water the root of the tree, then the parts and parcels automatically get watered, right? So just by learning about the world and how it operates and how to make a better place there for ourselves is not enough unless we go to the source. When we serve Krishna and we please Krishna, automatically everybody is benefited. So the next slide is about the academic benefits from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Now we all understand the necessity of reading Srimad Bhagavatam for the purpose of helping our children develop good character, helping our children go back to Godhead. But beyond that, there's also many, many other benefits that just simply follow this, the spiritual benefit. Benefits such as, that how we teach our children through Srimad Bhagavatam how to develop good reasoning abilities, critical thinking skills, communication skills, and good vocabulary. We know, in America, if someone, the law schools, when they're looking for students, they're looking for specifically for students who have a degree in philosophy. Now, why? Not because of the philosophical content, but because of the skills that is required to reach philosophical solutions. That clearly Srimad Bhagavatam gives these skills, these strong critical skills, the strong reasoning, logic, the skills to develop logic and analytical thinking is given. And then also the vocabulary in Srimad Bhagavatam is, like Prabhupada said earlier, is master's and PhD level. Just by reading Srimad Bhagavatam for 6 years, my children were able to enter college at a very early age. Of course, it happened accidentally. I wasn't planning for that. But yet, I was surprised that how this happened. Because Srimad Bhagavatam's vocabulary and language skills and comprehension skills it's very, very deep and very, very and easy to digest. Because again, it's presented in the form of stories. And not only that, the Srimad Bhagavatam uses skills like analogies, metaphors, allegories to highlight the disability in our children. For example, the analogy that Prabhupada uses for people to understand the difference between between the body and the soul by using the analogy of the car and the driver is superb. Because we are in this material condition, it's very difficult for us to understand such concepts without the help of these analogies. And when we present them to our children, they actually they are able to understand very easily, and they also develop great abstract thinking. For example, even the concept of something like death, which is so oftentimes repeated in Srimad Bhagavatam and could be a very, very difficult subject to teach our children, becomes very, very easy when we give them examples. For example, Prabhupada uses the analogy of the cat. You know how the cat, when it carries the rat that it catches in its mouth, and it also carries the kitten, its own kitten, in the mouth. But there's vast difference between the mentality of the kitten and the mentality of the mouse. The mouse is very, very fearful, whereas the kitten is feeling very safe. Because the mouse knows he's going to die, and he actually dies even before he eats it out of fright, right? So death for a non-devotee who's been averse to God is like the death of a kitten. But to a devotee, he feels very, very safe. Because he knows Krishna is there. and Krishna appears for his protection and takes him back to Godhead. So the same topic of death becomes easier to understand in this way. And of course, it is elaborated further in Srimad Bhagavatam through the story of Dhruv Maharaj. You know, how beautifully he goes back to Godhead, and how he's taken in this beautiful airplane. So death loses his fearfulness for a devotee, right? But the same topic of death can be discussed in a more fearful way in the story of Kapil Muni and Devahuti, where Kapil Muni describes the Sankhya philosophy. You know how the different the death coming for a sinful person in the form of hell and things like that can be understood in contrast with the devotees going back to Godhead. So in this way, we teach our children through contrast, by putting the positive and the negative together. So it loses its fearful power. It loses its horror, and this way children are able to digest things. And Srimad Bhagavatam does this very, very beautifully through different stories. And of course, metaphors, such as when Prabhupada describes himself as a mailman who takes the knowledge of the Shastras and gives it to his readers without opening it, without changing it. Just like a mailman will not open the letter, but gives it as it is, right? So such a beautiful metaphor by which a child can create, use his intelligence and imagination to understand and to think critically about these matters. So another thing, because the Bhagavatam, whatever it presents in a very logical and reasonable way and rational way, right? It's not dogmatic. Krishna never says, you do this, and that's it. No more argument. No, he presents it in a way that he leaves it up to us. He presents different sides of the story. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is not able to understand Krishna, and he presents a topic 3 times in 3 different ways in 3 different chapters. Krishna, do you want me to take sannyas, or do you want me to act? Do you want me to use my intelligence, or do you want me to act? So he's thinking. Arjuna is thinking. He's not just thinking that, okay, this is it. This is what Krishna says, and this is what I have to follow. No, Srimad Bhagavatam provides a very reasonable way for children to work out their thought process in a gradual, reasonable way by which they understand the logic behind it. Right? The logical reason why the world is created in this way, why we should worship Krishna. It presents the material world in a way that we are able to live in it, rather than just simply, while recognizing the dangerous nature of this material world and with all its negative qualities, is giving a very positive solution of how to live in it in a happy way while preparing oneself to go back to Godhead. So the next part is the methodology for teaching Srimad Bhagavatam to our children. So when my children were small and we began the study of Srimad Bhagavatam, we would sit in a circle. Now this can be done even in school situation or Sunday school or Bhakti Rikshas classes for children. We can sit in a circle, or we can have several rows of children sitting, and we take turns reading each verse in the chapter. We take turns reading it. And the reason why we take turns and we allow the children to read is because this attracts their attention. As children become restless and they get diverted, distracted. So the way to attract their attention is to make them take turns reading. This way, they're always eager that their turn is coming. In fact, children become so attached to reading that if you miss their turn, then they get really upset and they remind you. I do a lot of classes with children over the phone, about 100 children in groups of 10 or 12, and through different age groups. And even children older, like between 10 and 16, if I miss calling out their name, they tell me, you forgot to call out my name. That's how much they get attached to reading. So this is really a great way to draw their attention in, and also to increase their vocabulary and their reading. So we do that, and then we stop from time to time and we open it for discussion. Now, discussion is very, very important because it sharpens intellect. It makes a person think. Like I mentioned, all these qualities. How, in the earlier days, it used to be in this form. It used to be the method of teaching was mainly tutorial, where there would be one teacher and a few students, and they would they would choose a topic and they would discuss intensely. Because of this process, because this process sharpens the intellect, and they become very good in communications because they ask questions. We can also play devil's advocate, where we present a topic and we make two teams and we have a little debate. And it becomes really a fun thing because you know how Prabhupada in his morning walk conversation, he would take this, be a materialist, and his disciple would become a devotee, and they would hash out a certain point. For example, the question of the difference between the soul and body, or the scientist versus the devotee. So in this way, children learn. The children love challenge. They like to pick up challenge, even though they do not understand everything. The Mayavadi's perspective versus the theist perspective, the personalist perspective. They may not understand the entire depth, but yet they like this aspect of challenge and fighting, and they feel their faith in being a devotee becomes stronger and stronger. It's very sweet, seeing these young children wanting to defeat a Mayavadi, and all these points come again and again in Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's very, very good for children. Even something like whether we believe in reincarnation or not, and the different arguments for and against it. So it sharpens their mind. So it becomes also very enjoyable for them, and then of course it gives them a chance to reflect, where we take our children through different layers. We take them through different layers of thinking depending on their age. Like for younger children, their level of thinking may not be very deep. So we take them to just a couple layers, and then we could go deeper and deeper into it. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is wonderful, that the more you read it, the more you get fresher and newer meanings. Even for somebody who's reading it for 40 years, he's still going to get new meanings. It's limitless, it's endless, Srimad Bhagavatam. So we can use that technique for children. I remember discussing the part in the Prahlad story where Hiranyakashipu, where Prahlad had come home from school, and Hiranyakashipu so lovingly had put Prahlad on his lap to ask him what he had learned in school, and even his ears were falling on his head. And it was very, very, he was showing a lot of fatherly love, which was very natural. And so we started discussing that how was this possible that for a demon who's willing to kill his son, how can he have such emotions? And then we talked about real love. And I remember it was very, very enlivening for even the little children to understand that actually real love is when we put Krishna in the center. When we love Krishna, then we naturally love his parts and parcels. For example, if we love the Father, we naturally love our brothers and sisters, right? So love, we can have love, pure love for each other if we love the eternal Father, Lord Krishna. So in this way, they understood, okay, this is real love. So in many ways, we can do that. Now, when we are reading and discussing with them, we should be also encouraging them to ask questions and discussing those questions and creating an atmosphere which is giving them an opportunity for inquiry, for further inquiry, for submissive inquiry. So in this way, it becomes a two-way discussion, not just that we are asking the questions and we are giving the class, but rather children participate fully in those discussions. And what happens is, by participating fully in these discussions, we find that our relationship with our children or with our students become very, very close. Because Srimad Bhagavatam brings us to that closeness, because we're connecting on the level of the soul. And that connection on the level of the soul is much deeper than all the bodily connection that we may have with each other, right? Which is natural. But this connection that we can have with our children when we read Srimad Bhagavatam every day with them, then that bond becomes very, very strong. So that children will always accept parents and teachers as their guide, no matter even if they get older and they become teenagers, which is a very difficult period where children like to exercise their independence, they will still come to us for guidance, because those bonds have been established. And they also learn to share. They learn to share their inner thoughts and what they are experiencing in school, and the challenges they are facing. Many times parents come to me and say, well, my child doesn't tell me anything, what's going on, what's happening. And so they are very worried, because they feel like they may be losing them. So when children don't have that confidence that they can trust their parents, or they can they can understand, their parents can understand a different world out there, because there are so much devotees. Will they really understand what's going on in the world today? Will they really understand? So when these doubts come up, they stop sharing, right? But by reading Bhagavatam with them, and by understanding the nature of this material world, because it's full with the problems in this material world, it says that Srimad Bhagavatam, it covers every psychological situation in the world. There's envy, there's anger, there's greed, there's hatred, there's everything is there, every type of psychological situation is being presented here. But how to deal with them, how a devotee deals with them, that is also given there, right? So it's not like we are living in a world which is not grounded in reality. It is very real. Prabhupada mentioned how these stories are reflections of the world today and the people today. So in this way, we keep connected. We can keep connected with our children as they move out into the world while we stay here, For example, it's very interesting. I'll give you one example that we've been reading with. I've been reading with different groups the story of Prahlad Maharaj. How it's such an amazing story and such a wonderful story to read by contrast. To see the contrast. How Hiranyakashipu is the greatest terrorist that history has ever seen, but yet Prahlad is the greatest devotee. So in this way we can understand that even if we're living in a world of self-serving leaders, but yet we can be happy, we can live like Prahlad lived, right? As a devotee, we don't have to fear anything. That this is the nature of material life, but yet there is a way to understand why it is like that and how to live in it. So in the story in the first few chapters of the Prahlad story, we hear about Hiranyakashipu and his demoniac behavior, and how he had conquered the all the universes, the three worlds, and he had conquered all the elements, material elements. He was so powerful that even the sages were bowing down to him. and in spite of all these powers, he had, because of these powers, he had become so proud that he had, begun a reign of terror where he was destroying everything. He was destroying all the trees, killing the cows, the brahmanas, and become very, very ruthless. So through that story, we talked about many things, many subject matters. When Prabhupada talks about how you can learn about every subject matter, we were talking about ecology, how people who destroy the natural elements that Krishna has provided for everyone's benefit, when they destroy that, there's so much havoc. For example, the killing of cows, we discussed that at length. We discussed the destruction of trees, how we see that in the Vedic culture, there were fruit trees everywhere where anybody who's hungry would go and take a fruit, but you don't see that anymore, right? How gradually everything is getting contaminated. The food is getting contaminated. Why? And how opulence, which is born from fear and exploitation, is really not real opulence. So the opulence that we see, how different countries enjoy this wealth and opulence, is very insubstantial. It doesn't last too long because it is based on exploitation, right? But real opulence is something that is coming from Krishna, which is when we actually appreciate what Krishna gives us, where Mother Earth is fertilized by the gifts that the cows can give, and not by killing of cows. So in this way, we can discuss so many hot topics in today, the topic of environment, nature, and things like that. Then we can talk about the idea that then later on in that same chapter, in chapter 2, Hiranyakashipu talks about the principles of Bhagavad Gita. So it's really an exciting time for children where they see a demon giving higher knowledge to his relatives. And really, Prabhupada really expands that in a very enthusiastic way, till we understand that actually this knowledge is just theoretical from his side. It's not realized knowledge. Because right before that, he's fault finding in Krishna. He's calling Krishna, he's accusing Krishna of being in Maya, and he has no faith. In other words, his authority, his knowledge is not based on authority. It's not based on submission, right? So we hear that aspect of that. And then his story about Yamaraj preaching to the queens of their husband, queens of this kingdom, of this king who had died, and they were lamenting over his body. Right? We worry so much whether topics like death or going, should be presented to our children. But here, when I was doing these classes with my children, it's just amazing. There's a side in our children where they love horror. You see the children, they want topics to hear. They want to watch a movie on horror, because there's a side in all of us which likes things like that. So these things are very easily satisfied through Srimad Bhagavatam, because when they get to hear stories such as the story of the queens and how Yamaraj was presenting it as the king's soul hovering over his dead body, because the queens would not let the body be cremated, and so we're discussing at great length how the attached soul actually is not able to leave and go peacefully to another body, and how it's so miserable for that soul, and how we should give up. We should understand that we are not this body, but we are spirit souls. So it goes very deep. And I remember the children were really, really shocked to understand that actually when a person dies, it's just the body that dies. It's not the soul, because the soul is just hanging there. Its ability, it loses its attachment. But of course, it's another condition of the devotee. The devotee is immediately carried to Krishna Loka by by the agents of Krishna. So in this way, even very, very heavy topics can be presented in a way which makes it very enlivening, very knowledgeable for our children. And in this way, they feel very, very empowered that yes, this is the nature of life. When we hide things from them, and they get it from the outside world through media or through hearing or about somebody's death, it's very, very fearful for them, and they cannot make sense of it, and they start losing hope, and they become frustrated and confused. But these very topics, if it's presented to Srimad Bhagavatam, they are able to actually accept it in a very positive note, So now we're going to talk about how to teach Bhagavatam to toddlers. And for this, I think, I don't know if most of my audience here is from London, but in London itself, I heard there's a nice group, children's Bhagavatam group, where mothers get together and they teach their children Bhagavatam once a week through different, Srimad Bhagavatam. And I have an audio recording of a wonderful devotee, Govinda Kishori Mataji, who's making these audio recordings based on every chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. And she's presented in such a wonderful, creative way to give this knowledge to children of this age. So I'm going to play that to you, and please listen.
Oh my goodness, where are we? Can you hear that, Lally? Where are we?
We're in the forest of Saranya.
The forest of Saranya. Oh wow, it's so beautiful here. What can you see?
Checking birds.
You can see checking birds.
And loads of trees.
Loads of trees, yes. And there's, look, Lally, can you see? There's so many sages.
And
yes. Yes, you're right. There he is, yes. Oh my gosh, there's many great sages. They've all gathered together to perform a sacrifice for 1,000 years just because they want to please
Lord Krishna and his devotees.
Yes, they want to please Lord Krishna and his devotees. And who did you say was the leader? Where's the leader?
Sutta Goswami over there.
Oh yes, he's over there. Hare Krishna Sutta Goswami.
Hare Krishna Sutta Goswami.
Oh my goodness. The other sages are very respectful towards him. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I wonder why. Why are they so respectful towards him?
Because he's the tallest.
Or the oldest?
Oldest is the
Oh, I see.
And he knows all the scriptures.
Really? Wow. So he's the oldest out of all the sages, and he knows all the scriptures in all the world.
And he always listens to his spiritual master, so his spiritual master blessed him.
Oh, right, I see. Because he was very good and he listened to his spiritual master. His spiritual master was very pleased with him. His teacher was very pleased, and he lifted up his right hand and he blessed Sutta Goswami. And you know what? Sutta Goswami had loads of friends, and all his friends were learned sages as well. Did you know that? And you know, whoever your friends are, you become like that. And because all his other friends were learned sages, he was also a learned sage too. This is very interesting. Wow. Nice to meet you, Sutta Goswami, and nice to meet you, lovely sages all gathered together. I think, should we see what they're about to do? Somebody else that we're forgetting. Who is it?
So I hope you all enjoyed this, very nicely and creatively done. It just gives an idea how we can even teach small children Srimad Bhagavatam with whatever capacity we can. I remember doing a session with a very young child, which we are going to be discussing now, is She was, I think, 4.5 years old. And I spent about 45 minutes with her, just reading one section of Bhagavatam from Prabhupada's book. And then, just talking about it, explaining to her what was going on while I was reading the translations. And she was fascinated, and she sat there for 45 minutes. And it was so amazing, and she was so little. Right? So even children very young can be taught. We just have to become creative. And in this way, and they do pick up, especially children of this age, between 4 and 8 years old, they can pick up a lot. And we can actually challenge them with very, very challenging questions, and we can have very, very deep discussions with children of this age group as well. Now, in the earlier ages, like 4 and 5, the children may not know how to read, so we can read for them, and then open it up for discussion. Right? And we can, for example, I'll give you an example. I was doing this. Srimad Bhagavatam with my own grandson over Skype for quite some time. And then one time we were doing the story of Dhruv Maharaj, and the story where the airplane comes and to take Dhruv Maharaj back to Godhead. And such a beautiful description of how Nanda and Sunanda, they were there, and how beautiful they looked, and the airplane full of jewels, and it was so attractive. And he said, "Oh, Daddy, I want to go back to Godhead on this plane." And I said, "Okay, yeah, that's, you can definitely do that when your time comes." And he said, No, but I want to do it. I want to go right now. So I told him, "You sure you want to go now? Because if you want to go now, you will have to leave behind your father and mother, your parents." And he thought for a little while, and he said, "Well, I'm going to wait a little bit, because I don't want to make the same mistake as Ajamal did." And if you've heard the story of Ajamal, he was a wonderful Brahmin who was trained in good Brahminical qualities, but then he fell down from his principles after he saw a prostitute embracing a man. So he became very lustful. He brought the prostitute home and gave up his chaste wife. And later on, after many, many years, he had like 8 or 9 children, and he was dying. He was on his deathbed. And we know the story of how he was saved, because he called out Narayan. He was calling out for his son. And then Krishna gave him a second chance. And when he came back, and then from this near-death experience, he became very regretful, and he started lamenting why he had neglected his old parents and hadn't taken care of them. He was very, very regretful. So he remembered that part, and he brought the two together. And I've seen this ability and he was only like 5 years old, 4.5, 5 years old, and I've seen this ability in very, very small children, how they will take 2 different stories and they'll bring it together. And they'll go deep, and they'll go very, very deep. And you'll think that they are barely understanding anything, but they are. For small children, they get very restless. So how to put them in place and have them. So I used to, I've devised different ways. For example, when they become very restless, you give them a toy or something to engage their hands. That you may give them a coloring book, a coloring sheet, or you could give them a soft toy which they can play with, because they understand, okay, I cannot make noise, but yet they can, use their hands and do something. So this way they're hearing. You think that, oh, they're so distracted. How could they be hearing? But actually they are hearing, whatever you're saying, and they pick up, because as soon as you start asking questions, they have the answers, and they also come out and they ask questions. So in this way, Bhagavatam can be presented even very, very early in their life. Of course, when they get closer to 7 and 8, they are older and they can read quite fluently, and they get a lot more from it. So this is the group, the old group, and they are the most challenging, and they love challenge in this group. So now when we do Bhagavatam with them, the nature of questions gets deeper. It becomes why and the how questions. I'll give you some example. I'll read you some examples here, where we can follow some guidelines. You know, for example, why did Parikshit Maharaj not retaliate against the boy's curse? Or what can we learn from Parikshit Maharaj's behavior? So when we do these things, we don't point a finger at the children. We shouldn't say, how should you have behaved with your friend Johnny the other day, right? Such finger pointing destroys the discussion and intimidates the child. So we should leave it to the story and not make it very personal, okay? Because when we point fingers, then children get defensive, and they start looking, they become apprehensive, and they lose the taste, right? And then drawing connections with other stories from the scriptures that your child may already know. For example, we did that with when I gave you the example of, the child making a connection between Ajamal's story and Dhruva's story. Then there's another, like Shringi, he's showing anger in an inappropriate way. But there are many examples in scriptures where anger can be shown is appropriate. So in this way, we make comparisons in that way, right? And of course, then the realizations class afterwards is very, very nice for our children because they get a chance to speak. Now, I'll give you one example that we were doing the other day I was doing with one group, and that was the example of the Jaya and Vijaya story, how they were cursed by the 4 sages. Now, it becomes a very enlivening story where children feel very, very challenged, where we discuss different aspects and opened up for them that, were Jaya and Vijay right in stopping them? From stopping the sages from coming in, and were the sages right in expressing so much anger and cursing them? So who was right? Was the gatekeepers right, or were the sages right? And we can discuss different aspects. The sages seemed like they had authority to go in because they were very eager to see the Lord. They were very great devotees on it, but yet Jaya and Vijay were doing their duty of making sure that they were eligible. Maybe they were not. They were impersonalists, and they were not quite ready to go into Vaikuntha. So all these aspects get discussed and by taking sides, and children have their opinions and they are able to express what they feel, right? And then of course the suspense unravels when Krishna walks in and comes running to try to mediate, right? And Krishna is coming in both ways, to pacify the sages who are his devotees by showing his lotus feet and hoping that when they see his lotus feet, they're going to be pacified. They're not going to give more curses. And then protecting his 2 gatekeepers by making sure that they're not victims of further anger, right? And taking responsibility of their mistake by showing his dedication, his love for his devotees, how he's willing to even get repercussions, any type of repercussions for the mistakes of his devotees. He says, I am willing to lop off my arms because I take the responsibility, right? By seeing that behavior, the sages immediately, they are amazed and they immediately realize, wow, we should not have cursed these devotees. These devotees are very, very special to the Lord, even if they have an accidental fall down. Krishna never sees them and ever rejects them, right? So we get this deeper aspect. We can go through different layers where we can talk about Krishna's love for his devotees and the devotees' love for Krishna, and bring in many, many examples how Krishna is willing to do so many things for his devotees, right? So many things. Krishna is willing to take the form of Lord Nishingadev just to protect his one devotee. Krishna is willing to create a whole Dwarka under the sea just to protect his devotees overnight. Right? The length that Krishna will do for his devotees. Right? So these aspects can be brought in when we want to enter deeper layers of this same story. And for children who are younger, we can just stay at the level that they are okay with, right? But I've noticed that the earlier you start with your children, they develop a greater ability to go deeper and deeper, faster. So if you started teaching your children early on, then naturally, by the time their level of depth and critical thinking and all those things, it comes faster. It comes faster. I've seen children, their eyes just shine and they're just amazed. When we completed the Dhruva story, they were amazed. Wow, we've read Dhruva story so many times. We never understood it like this. It is so deep. Oh, and then some other child will say, wow, my brain is going to explode. So many layers, so many layers. These are the very skills, these abstract skills, they try to teach them to children in school, right? But imagine, now in school, in the modern school system, they are discovering that more important than giving children factual information. There's practically a knowledge explosion right now. There's no end to facts, right? But the amazing thing is that facts are changing every month, every year, to the point that what you're learning today is going to be obsolete tomorrow, right? So what is the use of cramming children with simply facts? So modern education has also understood that more important than them is to teach them skills that we've been talking about, skills of taking a problem and thoroughly understanding it, analyzing it with logic and critical thinking, and then putting forth one's own solutions and realizations, right? Putting it together, synthesizing it, and then giving it with one's own solutions and realizations, right? So these skills can be taught through Srimad Bhagavatam very easily. Why not use a spiritual set of facts of books rather than use material books, mundane books for giving that purpose? Because these can do both the jobs. Purify our hearts, purify the hearts of our children, take them back to Godhead, but also give them these skills so wonderfully. So this is the point, is by taking these spiritual books, we can teach those very skills in a way that children can benefit all around. Yes, we can become proud, and that was in the disease. Sorry, sorry. Okay. So this is the Dhruva story. I've already discussed many examples, so we'll just go through it very quickly. Beautiful story to start out with our children. Now, if our children haven't done Srimad Bhagavatam before, I would recommend starting with Dhruva story, because it's an easy story, yet it's very deep. And then you can move on to other stories like Prahlad and this Jaya Vijay story, and so many stories in Srimad Bhagavatam. Or, so we should do stories before we can go to the first canto, because we have to develop in our children the attraction to Srimad Bhagavatam before So we have to develop this attraction to Srimad Bhagavatam before we can give them teach them the first canto. This is what I would recommend. So in the Dhruva story, it was, we learn by contrast. I'm assuming that everybody knows about Dhruva. So hearing by contrast is very easy, because here we see the character of Suruchi, who's personifying envy, who has been very harsh to Dhruva because he's the son of another queen, and she's the favorite queen. So she says, you can't sit on his lap, on your father's lap, and you cannot get the kingdom either. You have to actually go to Krishna and please him, and this way you you can be born from my womb, and then you can become king. Right? In other words, she's wishing him death due to her envy. But Suniti, his real mother, who's been neglected by the king, is just the opposite. Instead of saying, getting upset, and which she had every right to do, but instead of that, she preaches to her son to give up envy, not to give pain to others, even though they give pain to you, and that actually your stepmother is right, and she's given you good instruction that the only way to fulfill your desires is to actually please Krishna. And so she encourages him in that way to please Krishna. And Dhruva, being a little Kshatriya, he left home and he went to the forest. And we know the story of how he pleased the Lord within 6 months. And he was able to see the Lord face to face. So in this way, we see the nature of Suniti by contrast, how she was turned a very unfortunate situation into a very fortunate situation. How children understand, okay, material life will bring a lot of problems, but yet we can see Krishna's hand in everything. We can see it in a way which is going to be beneficial for us. Then she also takes him to Krishna and says, ultimately, Krishna is like millions of mothers. I'm just one mother who cannot help you. But if you go to Krishna, he's equivalent to millions of mothers. So her chastity to Krishna is so amazing, right? Even though she'd been neglected by the king, but her chastity to Krishna made her so glorious. Even though her physical situation was very painful, but yet she became so glorified. So that comes through the chastity of both the mother and son to Krishna, and what made them successful. It gained Suniti a place in the spiritual world just by being a wonderful mother, just by being a mother who trained her child nicely. What a glorious role a mother could have. So she exemplifies many, many things, right? So this the children get and through this story. And another thing that we discussed is how, Suruchi got a heavy reaction, but the king did not get a heavy reaction. Right? Because, why? Because after all, the king was at fault. He did not take any steps. He did not follow his principles, religious principles of protecting his little son and speaking against his queen, his favorite queen. But Suruchi, she suffered, right? So we discussed how the king did not suffer such a heavy reaction because he was feeling very, very sorry for what he had done. So he talked about atonement, about the idea of saying sorry. What does it really mean when we say sorry to another person that we've done something? Does it mean we just say sorry and walk off? Or does it really mean the empathy, how to see what, get into that person's shoes and actually feel the regret and what to do and how to find solutions for cleaning up that offense we've done. Right? So in this way, we learn the deeper aspects of this story. And there's so many. Lord Caitanya would hear the story of Dhruva and Prahlad hundreds of times, because each time he read, he got newer and newer lessons from it. And this is the amazing thing. Any story that we bring home from the library, we children read, but they cannot read more than 1 or 2 times, right? But stories in Srimad Bhagavatam, one can keep reading it again and again and never get tired. Okay, so now I'm coming quite close to the end of my presentation. So many questions. I'll just wait for people to ask if they have any questions. But just something I thought I would like to bring up is that, many parents have asked me, how do we teach adult topics from Srimad Bhagavatam? For example, they're hesitant to teach topics, where it shows lusty relationships between man and woman, for example, or which is very can be very embarrassing to teach with our children, or topics of great violence, where we hear about Parusham's killing of the Kshatriyas and rivers of blood, and we hear about Lord Nishingadev, tearing Hiranyakashipu's abdomen and taking out intestines and wearing it and things like that. Are there children? The question is, are children going to become violent by reading those stories, or is it appropriate to teach children about, references to sex? So what I did was I taught everything. I didn't leave out any story, because whatever is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental, and it cannot be detrimental for us. Our children will learn about these topics no matter whether we give them to the Bhagavatam or not, because they're going to learn it, they're going to pick it up either from television, if they're watching television, or from schools, from their peers, or in school in some way or the other. So, and we can be sure that if they learn it from those other sources, which is from the perspective of sense gratification, will affect them in a detrimental way, right? Because there is two aspects of these two topics, right? It's not both sex and violence is not condemned in the scriptures. It's how it's in the scriptures is presented in a perspective of using them for a higher principle, for the principle of pleasing Krishna, for the principle of procreation, for the principle of bringing law and order in society, and for the purpose, especially violence, for the purpose for which it is meant to be, and nothing beyond that, not for the purpose of sense gratification. So, and we have ample examples in the scriptures how these two things are presented, right? For example, we hear of stories of Prajapatis, examples of Prajapatis such as Kashyap Muni and Daksha, how they were creating a progeny, thousands of progeny, but for a higher principle of God consciousness. And then we hear of, in contrast, we hear the story of Diti and the birth of Hiranyakashipu, right? So in Srimad Bhagavatam, we may hear of, references, lustful relationships between man and woman, the Puranja story, right? But yet we hear the consequences of such relationship, which is based simply on sense gratification. Both Puranjan and his dear wife, they are attacked by the soldiers of time, old age and death, and they undergo much suffering because of having lived a life of sense gratification. So that comes through very clearly to our children. Children learn through the Srimad Bhagavatam that the nature of this material world is that there is natural attraction between man and woman. But how to use that natural attraction in the service of the Lord for a higher principle in life, where, without just relegating it to just satisfying, one's senses, and we see the negative results of such things when we don't use it for a higher principle. So they get that very clearly through these stories. So there is no harm in going and through every part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because children will be very, very grateful later on when they've understood these topics through the Bhagavatam. They'll be very, very situated in the right place when they do end up flying their own nest and dealing with youth and all the restlessness that comes with it. They will be very grateful for that. Even topic like violence is so well presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Is with the perspective. Violence is done just for the purpose of rooting out violence. Just like we take a thorn to take out another thorn. But once it's done, it ends. It's not like the gratuitous violence that we see on television today or in real life today, where people are just killing each other for the sake of killing. There's no real purpose, right? And another point that comes through is that devotees don't have to do the killing. They don't have to do the violence. Krishna is the protector. Krishna will take care of it, right? We see that so clearly in the Krishna book, in 10th canto, where Krishna is always the one who's killing all these demons, right? The cowherd boys are not doing it. Mother Yashoda and Nand Maharaj, they're not doing it. It's Krishna who's protecting his devotees. It's Krishna who's finding creative ways to kill, right? How he tears apart the beak of Vakasura. He's finding novel ways just for sport. Now, this sport is already inherent in young children, right? So they take it very gleefully, knowing that Krishna is always there. So it's not detrimental. Of course, we can put it, use our own judgment if they're watching, for example, videos on Krishna, these stories, and if it becomes graphically very violent, then we can use our judgment. But in terms of reading it from the book, there is no such harm. Okay, so in this way we can understand. So I'm coming to an end of my presentation, and so I just want to talk very briefly about some of the resources that's available. One is the Homeschooling Krishna's Children that was published by BBT, and it talks about all the ABCs of parenting. Even though the book is called Homeschooling Krishna's Children, it is for all the parents who are raising children. It's presented in a way where everybody can get some tips in that. And also there's a very book section on how to teach Srimad Bhagavatam to our children as well. And we are also producing these Srimad Bhagavatam guidebooks for our children, starting from Canto 1. Now, this is a mammoth undertaking by with the help of many parents throughout the world who are spending a lot of time in creating resources for every chapter of the Bhagavatam. And these parents are talented in their own area. Some are skilled in English, some are skilled in, even have computer skills and art skills, and they are using these skills to create these resources. So I'm very thankful for all that help. And then and what we have in these books is we begin with a summary story of that chapter. And then we have activities to help children to understand the philosophy in that chapter in a way that is fun and digestible to them in an interesting way. And this is done through different activities such as critical thinking activities, analogy activities, introspective activities, acting activities, art activities. We have fun things like puzzles and some word searches and games also as well. So in this way, but parents, they don't have to use all the activities. They can pick and choose, and they are also useful for children all the way from 6 to 16 years old, and because it can be adapted for younger children as well as for older children. So if you're interested in getting these books, they are all available on UK Amazon, and we are now working on Canto 4. So, and they have been, by Krishna's grace, they have been accepted very nicely by different Gurukulas, the Mayapur Guru International School, as well as the Vrindavan Gurukula, and a few other homeschooling co-ops, as well as a lot of Sunday schools and individual parents. So if you're looking for resources to help, I would definitely, however, I would recommend that children first do this discussion process that I explained through Srila Prabhupada's book directly, and then go to the guidebooks to further their knowledge and to use these activities. And in this way, they will get a very well-rounded understanding of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I think I will end my presentation here. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak on this topic, and I will welcome any questions that anybody has on this.
Thank you so much, Mother Aruddha. It's really uplifting to just be absorbed in hearing of not just your experience, but your advice, and so encouraging. I think in everyday life, definitely so many parents struggle to make time for this, and associating with these realizations in this way, it's such an encouraging thing. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. So we have a stream of questions. Some of them have been answered since people have asked, but I still have some questions, so I will just go in order as I've received them. So I'll start with some that I've received privately. our nearest center is 20 miles away, and we don't have any devotee children nearby. When I hear from you on the benefits of homeschooling through the Bhagavatam, I feel inspired and enthusiastic. But after some time, my enthusiasm wanes because of fear that my children are falling behind academically compared to kids in schools around us. How can I maintain my faith in the process? So this is a question I'm asking on behalf of someone.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you could take a outside curriculum and do homeschooling through that. There's absolutely nothing wrong. This presentation that I did today is for everyone, whether your children are going to school or whether they're homeschooling. If you can make Srimad Bhagavatam an integral part of your children's lives, it will benefit them in both ways, whether you're homeschooling or not. If you're homeschooling, obviously you have more time to spend and the results are wonderful. But even if you're sending your children to school, then by studying Srimad Bhagavatam with them, you can actually, you can actually protect them from those outside influences in a way that can actually save them from all the all the intense degradation that comes through peer pressure, right? Because their intelligence will be situated properly in this Vedic perspective that we talked earlier about, right? I've noticed in my own experience that no matter what you give them, in terms of, social association with other children, devotee children, and other and practical devotional service, without the study of Shastra in our children's lives, it could happen that over time, as they get older and become teenagers, they can lose it and they become shaken and distracted. So I just want to point out that this is a very good way for parents who are unable to homeschool. They can supplement their children's education with the study of Srimad Bhagavatam. So for homeschoolers, also, there are so many requirements in different countries where one has to teach the children outside academic subjects. So you can continue to do that, but you can make Srimad Bhagavatam also a part of your daily lesson plan. So this way you can do both. You don't need to get worried about, you don't have to do entirely all the subjects from Srimad Bhagavatam. You don't have to do that. You can just do whatever is comfortable for you. My only suggestion, my strongest suggestion is that to also do Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's very encouraging. Okay, so I have some more questions, but before I do, does anyone want to ask their question out loud? Is there anyone that hasn't sent it to me and would like to ask anything? Okay, so the next question I have, someone is asking what online groups you have available. They're asking about their 4-year-old, but maybe if you could just let us know what you do have available, what spaces you have, or how they can find out more about these groups.
Yes, well, I generally take children from 8 years old or 7 years old, if they can read well, and all the way till 18. And I form different groups according to age groups. So a 4-year-old will be too young to teach online. And so, like I explained in one of my slides, how you can do it, just simply pick up a book, a good story, and begin, reading to them. Or if you even reading, if that's not enough they may not be able to sit in one place, then you can just do it through pictures, in Srimad Bhagavatam, and explain to them the story through pictures. And I explained all that in my earlier slide. So it can be done in a very very beautiful way, even for youngsters. And a 4-year-old is quite ready for that. Okay, but for online classes that I'm doing, the children need to be older, and we can definitely talk about that in making a group from London, and starting one group. And I can do that. And in this way, the parents over there can learn the process of how to do it and begin their own groups over there. That would be so wonderful.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we can do that. Maybe I can, if anyone's interested in a group from London, or just maybe, you know, a time zone that works that will be based around British Standard Time, if you could PM me, and then we can compile a list of how many we have interested in the age groups, and then I can email you, Mother Aruddha. Does that work, so that we're not bombarding you? Okay, thank you so much. I'll just check again. Does anyone want to ask their question out loud? Okay, I'll go to the next question. You've mostly answered this, but I guess just to clarify, should the Srimad Bhagavatam be discussed with 4 to 8-year-olds in order, for example, from Canto 1, Chapter 1, Verse 1, or can we do it completely based on stories from various cantos? Thank you. And this is for the 4 to 8-year-old range.
Yes, yes. If they haven't been exposed to Srimad Bhagavatam, then I would suggest just doing stories till they become very, good at that and attracted to Srimad Bhagavatam. Then we can go back to Canto 1, Chapter 1 from the beginning. Just even if you do one story and you develop that attraction and the ability to be attentive and go deeper based on their curiosity, then you can move on right after that. So you have to see where they're at, but definitely start with the story.
Thank you. And I'll just tag on a question that was related to this, which you mentioned Dhruva Maharaj was a good starting point as a story to tell. What other stories would you recommend?
Oh, yes. The Gajendra and Crocodile story is very good. It's a fun story. And then we have the story of Durvasa Muni and Ambarish is very good. We have the story of Bali Maharaj, fascinating story. The churning of the ocean, several chapters, going really deep, and so many aspects can be covered. And then, as I was reading, doing these groups, some children have been with me for a few years. And when we came to the story of even stories like Puranjan's story we were doing, they were so interested and so deep into it that after, you see, another way is to keep them going is to have realizations after every class, not just after every chapter, because after every class, for example, you may have complete a chapter in one turn, or you can do it in 2 turns, okay? But so after every end of every chapter, you throw it for their realizations. You ask them for realizations, because that's very, very important for them to give their opinion of how they feel. And this way you can connect with them deeper. So generally, a chapter of like 30 to 40 verses, 35 verses, I would finish in 1 hour, in 1 turn, because you don't have to stop at every verse, and then a chapter which has got 72 verses, it will take 2 times, and so in this way, we get an idea how much time it'll take. And the important thing is, if you can read, that's what I forgot to tell everybody, is that if you read purports ahead of time, then the discussion goes very nice, obviously, because you can bring the points in the purport to the children in a way they can understand, right? And you can write it on the side, on the purport, to remind you which point you want to discuss. However, if you don't have time to read the purport, it's okay, because as adults, we have enough of life's experiences to discuss, right? Don't give up just because you cannot read the purports, right? But reading purports ahead of time does help a lot to go deeper and get different aspects, right? So in this way, you can discuss. And I don't know what the original question was. I forgot. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think it was about 4 to 8-year-olds and
yes,
story form telling. And then I asked which particular stories you recommend.
Yes, so you can go into many, many stories. So the point I was making, that after we did the Puranjan story, they told me that Puranjan story was their favorite in the Bhagavatam. Imagine a story like Puranjan is their favorite. Why? Because they've developed that attraction over time. So even something so dense, so philosophically dense and heavy, such as Puranjan's story, they're able to appreciate and say, and these were teenagers, of course, and they were able to appreciate and say, this is my favorite story. It really even surprised me. And these children were doing with me first canto. So you can see, starting from first canto. You see, so the children will learn to appreciate more and more as you go on. So don't be afraid in taking a subject and dealing with it and present. You'll learn the technique of how to make it really interesting for them. It'll just come natural, even to take very highly philosophical topics and how to make it interesting.
Thank you so much. I'll just add on a quick question to that as well. What age do you recommend for reading the purports to the children and transitioning from just reading the translations?
Yes, well, I have groups. I mean, if the child has developed enough attraction for Srimad Bhagavatam, you will know whether the child can read purports. Okay, you will know. Every child is at a different level at different times. You know, what happens is if they're going to school, the schoolwork overtakes them. You know, they have just too much to do, and it becomes too overwhelming for them. So that is the struggle, how to get them. But yes, if they can, I would say 15, 16, you know, they may be quite ready. They are ready.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, Vrindavan Kumar Prabhu, I will unmute you. Are you unmuted? You can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Aruddha Mataji. I have heard a few of your lectures previously as well. Our son is a bit too young now, but me and my wife are planning and preparing a sort of a game plan how to begin once he's able to learn and listen. So I just wanted to validate one thing with you, if you think it is all right, or if there's any changes we need to make. As soon as he starts growing and able to at least listen and understand, maybe not read, we were hoping to go on a priority level. So on a priority 1, we wanted to use Srimad Bhagavatam stories on the time we get. As a second priority, we wanted to put maths and English. And in the third priority, as and when time permits, we wanted to add music or one of the other things you recommend. Other than this, we really wouldn't want to add anything else up till he reaches a point of 6-7 years, or when he starts to feel the need of understanding it. Do you think this is fine, or do you think we are missing out on anything important?
Are you talking about homeschooling curriculum, or
yes, homeschooling? Sorry,
yeah.
homeschooling.
Okay. Yes, I think it's a great curriculum. I think it's to begin with these basic subjects, such as Srimad Bhagavatam should take care of language arts comprehension, but you can always supplement with language books. That's okay. For example, a grammar book where he can spend 10 minutes a day learning grammar, or 15 minutes a day, or some other language workbook is fine. But yes, it is important to learn good language skills, right? And that can be done through Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as whatever you supplement with. And then you have, like you mentioned, math, which takes care of all the science side. Math is the basis for all science subjects. So, and then music, very important part of our children's life. So it seems like very, very good curriculum to start out with. And then as you feel, like you said, the need to supplement, depending on the homeschooling laws in your country and in your region, you can adapt accordingly, what is needed and what is required. But I want to, so I would just follow that, definitely.
Yes, thank you. Because mathematics at some point it becomes essential. So the basic tables and ability to do basic arithmetic. So we wanted to add that as he grows, and then we really don't want to add. I mean, if I go back to my schooling days, there were so many subjects which were pretty much pointless. I would say useless, and it just took our time and energy for no good reason. And when we look at them, we think that it was such a sad waste of time. Even though some of the schools in India still have them, and maybe they are mandated by law, but because we homeschool, we have that flexibility and privilege to pick and choose what we want and we don't want our child to look at. And so just taking your guidance to make sure that we don't miss out on something key. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Vrindavan Kumar Prabhu. Okay, so I have a question here. Can we read in story form at bedtime? And just to clarify on that, the person who's asking the question says, we've been reading stories at bedtime as opposed to having a discussion format. The 5-year-old likes to hear stories. She takes her time later on to digest it, I believe. So she doesn't really like discussion. Is that okay?
Yeah, in any form, Bhagavatam stories or any story from any Shastra is very, very beneficial for our children. And it's nice that she ends the day, she or he ends the day with these transcendental topics. If you can also do the other part of discussion and reading, it depends on the age of the child. If you can do that, also sit down and actually go deep into it while she's awake, and active, then that will carry its own benefit. And one couple I know does this, teaches Bhagavatam during the day in this discussion format, and at night she reads, or the father reads, Lilamrit every night while the children are lying in their beds. And they are so, attached to it. They don't want the father to stop. So, and they develop such devotion to Prabhupada, and they keep quoting different incidents in his life, in Prabhupada's life. So that also, Lilamrit becomes a great way to end the day also, and Bhagavatam can become a great way to spend during the day.
Thank you so much. I have another question. My little one, 2 years and 9 months, has a preference for stories from Srimad Bhagavatam that she feels an emotional connection to. For example, Rukmini or the Gopi stories or Mother Yashoda stories. Shall I try to change this and encourage her to listen to other stories too, or should I let her be?
Well, children like repetition, especially young children. They learn by repetition. That same story they're going to keep wanting to hear again and again and again. That's fine. And for her to read again, hear again and again those stories. Nothing really wrong with that. And you can see, as she, if she's willing to hear different, you can attract her in different ways. If not, then there's no harm in this. Yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone like to ask their question out loud before I go to the next question? Mother Aruddha, are you okay for time?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, great. Okay, one parent is asking, if we're looking for specific stories, what's the most efficient way of finding them in the Bhagavatam? I guess especially if we're not familiar with the Bhagavatam, what's the best way? For example, they know now that Dhruva Maharaj is a good place to start. How do they find that story?
Oh, take help from this Veda base and see, and type in and see where you can find it. Ask people, where is the Dhruva story, and people will be able to help and know. And if you go to, to Veda base, then you will see different stories, and you may remember that, oh, this story I remember is going to be a good one for the children, and pick out even those stories that you never thought about once you go through it, Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Okay. Does anyone else want to ask a question out loud?
Yeah, Hare Krishna Mataji, this is Narottama Das. So my understanding was, for doing homeschooling, it's better if you're doing it in a community, because then you interact with other children, interact with other children, and they develop their emotional and social behavior. But if you just couple and you would want to teach your children, how will they develop in that scenario? That was my concern about homeschooling, that you're just one family living away from other devotees, and how do we, is that practical from homeschooling perspective?
Yes. Well, if you have a community and you can do it together, obviously it's very, very nice. But what if you don't have? Then it still can become effective if we give our association within the family to each other. Because, in any situation, my point is that this process can work. Okay, so if it's easier to do it with a few children, I know one family in America who's homeschooling her 2 sons, and they have 2 friends that now with all this COVID thing and the lockdown, they at a certain time in the morning they get together and they read with their parents Srimad Bhagavatam, and I think they're doing the 3rd canto, and so and it becomes very enlivening for them. So so you can even in a homeschooling situation, you can connect with them, even with one other family, then you can do it together, and there can be very wonderful discussion in that way. My point is that don't give up studying Srimad Bhagavatam with your children just because circumstances are not quite favorable or the best.
Yeah, I think thanks Mataji for the answer. I think I was thinking of homeschooling, exclusive homeschoolings from that perspective. I totally agree that Srimad Bhagavatam has to be taught to our children, and that's a responsibility as a parent. We need to own that. So I was thinking that if we don't send our children to any school and they are at home, we have only one son. So if alone just being with parents, how will he develop social skills if he doesn't go to the school, for example?
Well, we're entering another topic here, the homeschooling topic. So social skills, it's a whole different topic, it's how to develop social skills in a homeschooling environment. Again, to connect with other children who are also at home, who are being homeschooled, and also to take part in festivals and dramas, and also taking out our children for different events, reaching out to others, sharing Krishna with others. They're able to develop social skills. It's amazing how children who are homeschooled, they develop better social skills than children who are going to school. They have lesser social skills, because social skills is is wider in a homeschooling situation where children are learning how to associate with people of different age groups. They are not locked down with children just of their own age group, and so they learn the ability to interact with different types of people in different ages, and this way they develop very good social skills. They also they have fewer peer pressure, which kind of makes them subservient to these digital openings, digital facilities where children actually don't use their social skills because they get so addicted to these digital things. So this really is very detrimental to their ability to relate with people. So all these studies have been done, actually, that children who don't grow up with these types of media, then they actually are better in social skills. So which is very prevalent in schools, due to the peer pressure. So it's not true that children unless the children are put together with 30 other children 8 hours a day, they cannot develop good social skills. In fact, it's just the opposite, actually, because they are with different types of people during their day, especially if you revolve their life in such a way where they can be exposed to the world out there, but in a protected way, then you've given them a lot more than an average child can get. My children, we were taking part in all types of preaching programs. They were even doing prison programs once a month, where children got a first-hand experience of what it is like in a prison. But also to see the compassionate side of how one can give Krishna to people who are also suffering, so much, and how to raise their consciousness. So all this is so easily available in a homeschooling environment because the facility, the time is there, and all these And so there's no lack of social skills in a homeschooling environment. Of course, it's easier if you have two children, if you have a family with two children instead of one, because then the child also has another child to associate with during the day, But then we can always, going to the temple on weekends or associating with other homeschooling families also gives them enough social opportunities. Okay.
Thank you, Mataji. I had one more question, but I'll ask later. Let others ask question.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ask one question from the chat.
Mm-hmm.
One mother is saying that she couldn't possibly answer all of the questions that you had listed for Dhruva Maharaj's story. How do we share with our children in a critical way if we have not studied it like that?
When I started teaching them Srimad Bhagavatam, I was learning for the first time with them. And I was we were running a center, and we were just so busy with so many duties, devotional duties, that I even never had the time to read ahead of time, the purports. So we develop the skills as we teach them, as we study with them, because it comes naturally, because this is the nature of Srimad Bhagavatam. It presents everything in a way that makes us think and inquire further. There's so many layers, like I mentioned earlier, of thinking, and it takes us through those layers. It forces us to actually go through those thinking process. So it will come naturally, even if if you're not a Bhagavatam scholar, or you haven't done, you don't have a degree, still it can work, And if you have time, I would say read some purports if you have time. Even if you didn't read all of them, you could read even a few and you mark down. That may give you, if you start out doing that, it will give you confidence in how to do it, So maybe you should start out just reading a few purports and developing that confidence that, okay, this is how I'm going to bring it up. This is how I'm going to do this, And with your own children, it just comes natural. Really, you don't have to make so much effort, but that will help. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a practical question. One devotee is in Colombia and doesn't easily get deliveries there. Are your guidebooks available online, or could they be made available online?
They are available on UK Amazon. They're all available.
So there's one devotee who's in Colombia, and she doesn't get a delivery. So would she be able to kind of get an online PDF or an ebook, I guess is what she's wondering about?
No, I don't have it in an e-form as yet. But we will, for the future, we will think something in that line, But unfortunately, we don't have anything available like that. Yeah, it's so unfortunate that you cannot get the delivery, but maybe it'll open up after some time and make it. Yeah.
I'll message her privately and see if I can help somehow.
Okay.
Okay, another question from the chat. Okay, I was wondering this too. So, you had many projects alongside homeschooling and raising your children. How did you manage that? How did you manage your energy levels in creating a community in Idaho? And how did you manage staying inspired while homeschooling?
Well, the inspiration comes through, if we, if we do devotional activities, there's natural inspiration that comes from serving Krishna. And even though I was a new mother and I was totally not qualified in Srimad Bhagavatam or in any other aspect, but yet by just doing it, I developed that enthusiasm and seeing the results in my children. It's very obvious as you start teaching them and guiding them through practical devotional service based on the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. You see there is a natural incentive because you see the results and they come quick. You see the ability to, they just like they're naughty, children, especially boys, they can get really naughty and rowdy and all that. But through that, you see that transcendental nature shining, where they, like I wrote in one part of the book, they practically, you see them like little saints going around because you've raised them in that environment of Krishna consciousness. So it becomes very pleasing to the heart, it becomes very pleasing. And that becomes our incentive as parents. And so we grow as they grow. And as we are growing, that becomes a push for us to keep going in spite of the hard work. We see how everything doesn't come without sacrifice, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If we don't do this, then we will have an urge, because it's our nature to serve. So we will serve in other areas. And that's why we see non-devotees, they still want to serve, but they serve in perverted ways, right? So in this way, we serve in the best way possible, where we can benefit greatly by this process. We see that in stories of Srimad Bhagavatam, how ultimately a person becomes a pure devotee only through a life of sacrifice, right? Jay and Vijay are willing to give up, are willing to take birth as three lifetimes as demons, just so to fulfill Krishna's desire to fight. Imagine. Devaki is willing to have 7 children killed because she wants Krishna as the 8th child. So in this way we understand, yes, why don't, this is, if you want to become devotees, then we have to do some sacrifice. And to sacrifice for our children is very, very natural. It's very important. And we have to see whatever we see our children as pure, whatever we do from them as pure devotional service. Because we see them as servants of Krishna, and we see them, that in future they're going to serve Krishna, right? So in this way, we can keep our momentum up. Of course, there's practical reality as well that we have to deal with. How do we manage our time? How do we manage our home? And I have spoken at length in that book, Homeschooling Krishna's Children, how to manage your home life in a way that you can becomes conducive to the spiritual life. I remember even just simple things like managing my kitchen, because I was doing so many things. I redesigned my kitchen to make it so, efficient, where I could go, zoom, and I'm done, So things like that I would do. So one has to be very practical in how we can get the maximum out of our day in a way that becomes, and, if I had to take a nap during the day because I didn't get enough sleep, I would just go ahead and do it. My children knew that my mother is tired today and I need to, take care of myself and keep myself busy. It's not like we have to be there 24/7, and become like martyrs. No, we develop a very practical system of how to manage, with children at home, if we are homeschooling, or even to manage children who are going to school. We develop a very practical system of incorporating, getting enough help, doing enough for our body so we keep healthy, fathers, how they can help. So it's like management, good time management, and of course it's going to be not without challenges, and so we take these challenges, just like there's challenges also when children go to school, tremendous challenge, the anxiety and how to deal, running to school. I remember when they were going to school for 2-3 years, I was running back and forth, trying to volunteer time there to figure out what they're doing in school, and then taking, cookies for them without cakes because there was some birthday party going on. And then I realized, oh, I'm working really hard anyway. Why not work hard this way by keeping them at home and giving them a Krishna conscious lifestyle, So, and of course that brought different challenges, but yet for me personally, they were better challenges, something that I was feeling great happiness in doing. So you have to see where you want to be and adjust your life accordingly. But don't give up. If you're feeling strong about homeschooling, don't give up just because it's very difficult. You can make it easier for yourself. We have to remember whatever we give, it will be beneficial to our children. Because as you know, in homeschooling, even a little bit goes a long way. What children learn in the whole year, I covered in 3 months, because when I first started out homeschooling, I bought a curriculum and I said, I don't know if I can do it. I was really actually nervous. Homeschooling was a new thing actually among devotees and even in the world out there. And it was a long time ago. And I thought, well, I better buy a curriculum. And so I bought a curriculum. That was summer. And I was so nervous. I thought, if it doesn't work, I'm going to just send them back to school after summer. And to my surprise, they had finished the entire curriculum in 3 months. And we were doing like 2 hours a day, barely, and they had, because the quality of time that you spend with them, and that was including 2 or 3 hours, including Srimad Bhagavatam, that included Srimad, and then you realize, because the quality of time that you're putting into that is just, is so good compared to what they're getting in schools. Because the teacher over there is, managing 30 kids, and she has to do what the average child needs, not for those who are exceptionally bright or for those who are lagging behind. She cannot. It's not physically, it's impossible, right? So if your child is brighter, he's lagging behind. He doesn't get enough challenge. And if your child is less, then, just is frustrated, right? So in this way, I looked at different things. It wasn't a decision that I just suddenly made. I was volunteering time. I was seeing the environment, the value system, feeling a great lack of that. I was looking at academically, how they're doing. So I studied everything by volunteering. It was a private school and they allowed me to go there, to volunteer time. And so that, so I made my judgment, okay, what is it? And mostly I was frustrated with them, teaching anything devotional, because after 8 hours, they were in no mood to do anything. They were just not in any mood to take up devotional things. So it was a big struggle on my part. So lack of time was also a big factor. So I think I veered off into different topics, but I just want to say that even if you can give half of what you think is the ideal, is still good. It's still good. And not to give up and not to lose hope, because it's so pleasing to Krishna. It's so pleasing to Krishna to raise children who can become wonderful devotees. It's pure devotional service, really.
Thank you so much. Just to follow up, you said it's so nice having little saints running around the house, and it's such a beautiful thing. But I find that sometimes parents can feel discouraged because either they feel that they're bringing the Bhagavatam too late into their home, or maybe their children by different circumstances have to go to school. So in those different circumstances, I know you already said don't give up hope, but what can you say to encourage those families that either feel it's too late or the education system they've chosen is different, but they still want to accommodate the Bhagavatam? Mm-hmm. What would you advise them?
Yes. There are many parents out there, for them, they're already teenagers and they may not have adopted these principles earlier on. It's okay. Don't give up, because, we have examples in ISKCON, great devotees who have started Krishna consciousness quite late in their life, right? As teenagers, and who are like, gurus now and sannyasis. And they started Krishna consciousness late in their life, right? And their environment their early childhood was steeped in, materialism, right? Meat eating and all kinds of things. And they share that with devotees, right? So, but yet they became such great devotees. So Krishna has a plan for everyone. Krishna has a plan for your children, where, even though they may not have been raised in a totally Krishna conscious environment, but we don't know when Krishna, if you do the right things, we don't know when Krishna is going to, pull that hook in them and bring them to him, So Krishna has planted all these hooks in us, and we don't know when he's going to pull that hook. And suddenly the child is going to realize, oh, wow, this is where I want to be at, right? So we cannot give up. We know that Krishna has a plan for each one of our children. And just by being sincere and trying to do the best in different ways and in creative ways. Now for some parents it's a challenge to bring Srimad Bhagavatam to them at this late age, as teenagers. How to even bring them, how to even get them interested, right? Studying. Well, the nature of Srimad Bhagavatam is such that once you start, somehow the attraction will be there. I've known some children who give up, and then I see them back, after just 6 months or 1 year, even 1 year, even earlier, right? They come back. They can't give it up. They can't give it up. So yes, the starting is a little difficult, but even if you spend like 15 minutes a day, like, family time or something, or even if the husband is busy or you're busy, one of the parent sits down with the children and just reads Srimad Bhagavatam, even for a little bit, the attraction will develop. Okay. And that can lead to, further and further reading. Even if you did it like once a week, why not? At least something, even twice a week, So in this way, we can develop. And then you can think of creative ways how to get them into it, Of course, visits to the temple, all these things, and getting involved in devotional activities also helps very much. And then, of course, you can maybe take them to, if they're old enough, like 18 or, you can take them to Mayapur and maybe join them in some course, Shastric course, where they're in the association of many devotees. And in London Temple may provide that facility. It's such a big temple. Soho Street Temple. I mean, they have so many facilities already over there. But anything, you can, if you pray to Krishna sincerely and to sincerely try to give them this, just get that little hook, see which way your child is really, interested in, and to provide that in an expert way, I think it will help,
That was wonderful. Thank you. The devotees really are the givers of hope. So encouraging. Mother Aruddha, how are you for time? A few more questions? Or
yeah.
You're okay? Oh,
Yes.
So kind. Thank you so much. Okay. So I will go through the questions in order. Okay, here's a question. How do you explain the mixed actions of heroes in the Shastras, such as Yudhishthira Maharaj, who is revered as dharmic and the ideal king, but gambled away his kingdom and his wife?
Oh, okay. Well, there's many aspects to Mahabharata. Is is so much about different topics. It deals with politics, and it deals with the nature of Kshatriyas, and it also deals. It's also dealing with devotion to Krishna. So there's many other subject matters and details that is provided. So it's a very complicated, story of many different things working in any one incident. So we see Yudhishthira Maharaj as a great devotee, yet we see him gamble away Draupadi, but that also is part of Krishna's plan. This is how I would see it, is part of Krishna's plan, how he wanted the whole Mahabharata to unfold in a way where he wanted to glorify the Pandavas. How was this Mahabharata going to happen without them gambling Draupadi? That was one thing that led to this big war. So again, it's part of the higher plan of Krishna, and then the nature of a Kshatriya is also being discussed at another level. So there's different levels, the deeply internal level and the external level that we're dealing with. Externally, we see so many faults in these devotees, but yet there's a higher aspect to it, right? The higher aspect that is presented in the Bhagavatam. You see, that's why Bhagavatam is a higher literature than Mahabharata, because it's very, very pure. It's dealing only directly with Krishna and his pure devotees, whereas Mahabharata is Krishna is one of the figures. Is one of the figures. You see, that's why even first learning through Bhagavatam, the understanding Mahabharata through the Bhagavatam, which is presented so nicely in the first canto, is very, very beneficial. So I would recommend dealing with Mahabharata through the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then, of course, Krishna Dharma spoke on Mahabharata is wonderful. One can go deep into that. And it becomes a great reading for the children because it's like a storybook. But it's a scripture, you know, so it's very nice.
Thank you so much. There's a similar question. I think it's along the lines of the same theme of explaining certain points that are unconventional to us. How do you explain 2 or 3 wives in the Dhruva Maharaj story to the children? How do you explain if they ask what a stepmother is?
Yes. So, I mean, we have a lot of, in modern world, we have a lot of stepmothers, you know, you have many people marry several times, and there's so many, this concept of stepmother is all there for children. If they go to school, they understand what is the meaning of having a stepmother and half brothers and half sisters and stepfathers. It's just so much in the social system right now. So it's not a strange concept for them to have a stepmother. However, in this context of Dhruva Maharaj, of Uttanapad having so many wives, this was the nature of the Kshatriyas. They were allowed to marry more than one, because the reason was that when they married, they were able to bring that kingdom from where the girl came from under their jurisdiction. It was a nice way of forming coalitions, you know, by marrying their daughters, you know, and those kings will surrender. But also the higher principle, the deeper principle is that in the Vedic culture, you know, the culture was so based on good reasoning and principles that we lack today, that, you know, the concept of having more than one wife was based on the idea that a husband would take care of the wives in a very responsible way. But what you see today is that people, you know, they have a relationship with one person and then they leave that person and go to another relationship, and that girl is left behind to fend for herself, and the man is behaving in a very irresponsible way without taking care. You know, it's basically like prostitution, basically. And with the result that the girl is left holding either a baby or her life, which is torn to pieces, right? So because this tendency was, you know, is still there, right? Where they would, they're never satisfied with one relationship. So rather than dealing in a responsible way where they could take care, if they had desires, then they could take care in the proper way to get married and to take care of all of their people that they had relationship. They behaved with it irresponsibly. So recognizing that that desire that can exist in men, the Vedic culture allowed polygamy, you know, where the kings were able to marry more than one wife, and they would keep them very well in a very opulent way and in a very respectful way. And so this was allowed. Of course, polygamy is not allowed in Kali Yuga because there are no men who are like that, you see, who have that caliber. They are degraded if they were to have more than one. They can't even manage even one, right? Family, it's difficult to manage even one nowadays, right? So in this way, we can go deeper. You know, Prabhupada talks about these things in his booklets very clearly. So we have to always see the deeper aspect and explain to our children in that way. That, of course, we cannot explain everything to children, but in a way, enough where they can understand. And there's enough that they see in the world today where they can relate with it. It's not something that they need to be hidden from, you know. It's out there, the way people, you know, the girl and the boy, the relationships is very much open and degraded nowadays for them to understand that, yes, these things exist. However, Uttanapad was an ideal king, and he did it in a very exemplary way. However, he showed his weakness and how Krishna, you know, he was punished because of that, you know. So, yes, sorry, it's a very long-winded way of explaining these things. But
no, wonderful. It's so insightful. I think we're also grateful for this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. During the beginning of lockdown, we started 5 to 10 minutes of Srimad Bhagavatam sessions, starting from the beginning, chapter 1, canto 1, text 1. Now we are on canto 1, chapter 3, verse 15. We just draw and write a few words linked to verses. The kids are 6-year-old twins. Do you recommend moving to the story form as you suggested? Is it more beneficial in the long term? And he also says they enjoy the time together at the moment because it's a father-daughter's activity. So should they continue as they're going, or should they go back to stories?
No, I think if it's working, it's so nice. So you can find so many creative ways of doing it. And if it's keeping, the way to see is that, are the children happy? And every day they are running for this time. If they are, that means you're doing it right. That is the key thing to understand. Okay. So you can develop your own methodology. If it works, it means it's good, you know.
Yeah, that's very empowering. I guess sometimes we try to replicate someone's experience, but we just begin and we find what works. And you're saying that if people are finding something that's working for them, they don't have to create a new system. Okay.
No.
Thank you. Another question. When can we start reading and discussing Krishna book with children?
Well, anytime. Krishna book is just so many fun stories. I remember I sometimes do the 10th canto with children because it's just in the form of stories, and it's so deep, though. It's so deep. But because it's in the form of stories, children they find it very interesting. So why not? Prabhupada gave the 10th canto in the form of Krishna book. So it's meant, and the devotees were distributing them mass, in the early days, right? And this is the 10th canto. So Prabhupada was bringing the 10th canto to the people, to the outside people out there. Because when we read it in context with Prabhupada's explanations, our mind will not be diverted. We will not misinterpret them, you see. That's why reading the 10th canto with the puppets in the light of Prabhupada's and the Acharya's explanation is very important. That's what's important. Yeah.
One devotee is wondering, what age were your children when they started to homeschool?
Okay, so one was 6 and one was 8. So that before that, for 2 to 3 years, they went to school. Yes. So then that's when I pulled them out.
Okay. Yeah, I remember reading in your book, or maybe it was in a class, but you spoke about the inappropriate behavior of the teacher that the children were seeing, and the way she was behaving with her boyfriend who would be there when the children were in the class, and funny things like that. And you realize that it's better they have proper role models at home. That's when you went to
and
home.
this was in a private school that we were paying a lot for this school, because I thought they would be better. In some ways they are, but not too much. Same problems exist everywhere, whether it's a private school or a public school. So yes, I was quite disappointed in, like I said earlier, in many ways. Yes.
I have a question that's more to do with children's behavior rather than to do with the Bhagavatam. Go ahead. Okay. Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for the wonderful class. My question is not directly related, but more about how to keep both kids happily engaged at the same time. My children are young and at times they have friction. Is that normal, and how can I handle it?
Well, that's normal for children to fight and have friction. It's it's like the empty mind is a devil's workshop saying. So if you engage them if they have something positive to do, then naturally there will be less chances of misbehavior. In other words, we give them the higher taste, and the way we give them its higher taste is by engaging them. I remember when I would be busy in the kitchen, I would engage them in the kitchen. Whatever I would do, I would just try to engage them right in that area. Like I would give them dough and they would make their own chapatis, in the corner of the kitchen or a bit outside, like that. And they would pretend they were making chapatis for Krishna. And then I would constantly be talking to them. It's just like, when children, if you keep talking to them, then their mind is more, can be more controlled. So talking to them about different things, about Krishna, engaging their minds and their hands in different ways. A mother has to be really, really creative in that, Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's easier not to hear a beautiful class while we are cooking, but the reality is that we cannot do that till we are raising our children, and there will be ample time for that later on. Once you've done your job, the children have developed such study skills that very soon, even before they go to college, much before, they will develop their own independent study skills, and your involvement in the actual study will become fewer and fewer, So, Krishna will keep all that condensed for you, all the things that you would have gained if you were heard a class during that time, or you would have chanted wonderful rounds in the peace, and everything, and meditated on Krishna and had the ability to read tons and tons of books. All that Krishna will keep it condensed for you once you, get done your duty of raising beautiful children. And he will give it that to you. He'll keep it and he'll surprise you with it, because you will have made so much advancement in that process.
Wonderful, thank you. I have a question that I actually received earlier this week. You've partially covered it, but I think it's going to be a common question, so I thought we could just get a list together. The question says, I got an email from our mixed state school saying that human reproduction may be introduced earlier than year 6. So year 6 is roughly age 10, 11. Unless
I didn't get it, Svarna. I didn't get that question. Can you read a little bit louder? Yeah.
I got an email from our mixed state school saying that human reproduction may be introduced earlier than the age of 10 or 11.
What production?
A human reproduction, the human reproduction system.
Oh,
So
okay.
is asking,
yes. Oh, I see. I get it now. Okay, yeah.
Sorry. So the mother is asking, her eldest, who is currently 8, will be affected. I want to know how Mother Aruddha approached it, and if there are any Vedic stories that could help explain the subject from a Vedic perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I discussed that at length. I mentioned about adult education, how to give it through the Srimad Bhagavatam is a much better way to introduce that before they're introduced in school, because, like, for example, in the story of the Puranjan, there's some detailed descriptions of the, breasts of women, and it becomes quite embarrassing, for us to read with their children, especially if it's the father and things like that, right? But the deeper point that we can make is that how a woman's body is meant for nurturing children, and that's why in the Vedic culture, all women were referred to as mothers. When Swambhu Manu addresses his daughter, Devahuti, when she's leaving and he's shedding tears, he calls her mother, right? It's because when a woman is looked in the role of the mother, there's less chance of her being disrespected ever. The role, a woman in the form of mother is always respected, But if the women are treated in a way where they are objects of sense gratification, where their body is glorified, or they, in this way, there's no respect. And children are trained to see in that way, you see. But throughout Bhagavatam, a woman is respected. She's respected, as a mother, primarily as a role as a mother. Yes, there's nothing stopping her from becoming a leader, or we see that in the case of Jahnavi. Mata, who's the wife of Lord Nityananda, she's actually guru too and leader, right? But you see in her life, her primary role was that of a mother, where she was nurturing the children of her wife, the Lord Nityananda's first wife. She was having so much happiness in doing that role. So in other words, that it doesn't stop a woman from taking those roles in life, but to see her primarily in the form of nurturing, in the form of a mother, is very, very important for her to gain that respect and for the society to respect, you see. So when a child learns about the body of, in that way, of a woman in that way, she and he can be trained to see that body in that way, you see, and to how to respect women. That is very, very important. Through the Srimad Bhagavatam, we can cultivate that respect where children, and it makes for great Vaishnava relationships later on in life, right? But children who grew up in learning about the men and women through the aspects of sense gratification, then naturally it's all about sex and it's all about lust, and it's total degradation in society. And we see the repercussions of such degradation, right? We see the failure of family life in a way where it's so hard for these children to come to Krishna consciousness, because there has to be some culture, right? Some basic external culture has to be there where a woman knows that she's not going to be thrown out the next day, right? Where there has to be some semblance of principles, right? So that is inculcated through Srimad Bhagavatam, this culture of respect. And without that, living in a society where there is no culture of respect or any values, it's very hard, you see. And then when the child goes and takes that in school, at least he has some perspective, you see. He has some perspective. Okay.
Thank you so much. Really, we can see everything through the eyes of Shastra. It's so helpful to hear your perspective on it. Okay, Vrindavan Kumar Prabhu has a question. I will try to unmute you. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. This question actually comes from my wife. She was keen to know the typical schedule that Aruddha Mataji followed when she was homeschooling. So we don't want to go into too much detail, but just like on a summary view, like how she allocated her time, morning this many hours for cooking, teaching, extracurricular. So we get an idea how you actually split your time and managed it. Thank you.
So homeschooling especially is a very broad subject in the sense that everybody can adapt to their own situation, what is best for them, what works for them. For example, in a situation where the husband has to leave home for work early, then naturally you'll adopt a different mode of your morning will be in a different schedule versus somebody whose husband is on a schedule which is later. I mean, it depends on, because generally a woman has to take care of has certain needs that she has to take care of, right? So in my situation, it was in a way where we started out with the morning program, and our morning program was generally by 6 or 6:30 because we had a preaching center, and our evenings went very late, and it was very difficult to get on the schedule of Brahma Murta's schedule, very, very difficult. And sometimes my husband was going late to work and coming home late also. So that made it very hard because the children would wait for him. So Grahastha life can bring its own challenges. And so what I did was adapt myself to those challenges in the way where life can go on, but keeping in mind just the different important things that Prabhupada asked us to do. Okay, we start our day with a morning program. Now the morning program can be adjusted according to to the children's level of attention. Like there's younger children, they have lesser attention span, so we can make it shorter. So not a problem with how flexible we can make it. We can do a little agarbatti or with incense and flower and a fan, or we can do an elaborate one depending on your time and situation. But the point is that we must do a morning program where the children start out the day chanting and dancing, where it sets the day very nicely, and we see fewer misbehavior problems in children who start their day singing and chanting and dancing. And we should make it very enthusiastic for the children, so the children can feel the joys of Krishna consciousness, not like a punishment, and be very flexible about it. Okay, that's one thing. And then we would, my husband would be going to work, and then I would sit down with my children to study Srimad Bhagavatam as the first thing. And we would study, and every day would be different. Sometimes it would be just 1 hour, and sometimes it would be 2 hours with a little break. So the nice thing about homeschooling is there was never a bell saying that, okay, now there's time for another class. We could go on if the discussion was very, very interesting and very deep, or we could make it shorter if there was a day where things were not going right. So in this way, we would do about 2 hours of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we'd, depending on if we had a preaching program, we'd stop over there and go for that preaching program. Sometimes preaching programs would start right about that time, 11 or something, and we had a book table somewhere or a prasadam table somewhere that we needed, because I would take very active, my husband and I would take active interest in reaching out to people, and we would look at the city calendar and see where we could get in and plan to have a table ahead of time, like that. And so we had a calendar, a city calendar, and we knew where I'd want to take the children and expose them to the outside world and give them a first-hand experience of how to give Krishna to others. Of course, they would be a lot of times just observing. They were little, as younger, but they were learning. And this way we'd spend a few hours during this. We would also have school programs where we are reaching out to children and give presentation on Krishna consciousness, even to small children, like to day schools or libraries. And then as they got older, we did it for elementary school children, and then to high schools. This way, they were able to present, as eventually they were able to present completely, but most, a lot of the times they were simply observing and doing little things that they could do, like singing, chanting, or, showing the dress, explaining about the dress, so many things. And it's a whole different topic that I can go into at some other future date if people need more guidance in that. But basically, that's how my half a day would go. And then it was really so wonderful because children would be so enthused and so happy having gone out to bring Krishna to others, and because they would feel their faith and identity in Krishna become stronger and stronger. And we became more and more enthusiastic. And this way, and then the afternoon would be spent in math, teaching them math and music, So this is how pretty much we divided a day. And of course, there would be always unforeseen circumstances, things happening, and I feel that we should be very flexible, because one day, if you cannot do math, then you can do the next day a little bit more. So this way you can keep yourself open. And so if there's something more valuable that needs to be done, then you feel freedom to do that, and knowing that, okay, well, I can always catch up later, you see? So that flexibility provides, takes away that anxiety, that, oh, I didn't cover this or didn't cover that. It takes away that anxiety. Of course, if you're introducing other subjects in your homeschooling, that's okay. So you adapt it differently. You may want to start it with Srimad Bhagavatam and then go straight to the other subjects, teach them during the morning hours. Whatever you want to do, in terms of adaptation is open, is for you to adapt to. And you may do things, exciting extracurricular things in the afternoon. And I used to do that. Sometimes events were in the afternoon and we'd spend the morning studying. Studying means doing Bhagavatam and math and music, whatever. So it should be flexible where you can go back and forth and adapt to different things. Okay. Wonderful. So this is basically what my life was. And of course, we had festivals where we take off like a few days off from the routine of homeschooling and do it in a more creative way, where we discuss about, if it's Krishna Janmashtami, we take a week off and we discuss about Krishna throughout the week, his stories and his pastimes I'd given them writing assignments, like writing a play, because that would come much earlier because they would have to practice the play for a couple months with their friends. So script writing, so you can make it real fun and creative for them, so that they get away from the monotony of always doing the same thing, and you can make it very, very creative in that way. Reaching out, plays and dramas, festivals. I mean, I don't think my children ever remembered like school, like a real school type environment. They thought it was one big play, their life, but yet I knew how much they were learning. So this is how, and so therefore their motivation was very high, because Krishna consciousness was always a part of their life, their picture. Now every situation can be different, right? I mean, I had that preaching center, but you may have a different situation where you may be able to go to the temple, more frequently, and get that inspiration for your children in that way. It's not just one way. Our Prabhupada made a whole house in a house in which the whole world could live in, right? So
Yes,
it's very
thank you,
positive,
Mataji.
dynamic. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So, Aruddha Mataji, I have a few more questions that are coming through. They're more on the topic of homeschooling.
Okay. What I'm seeing is that there's a group. Yes, what I'm observing is there's a group out there who's very interested in homeschooling. So I can do it now if they want to be there in this Zoom, because otherwise, or I could do it later. But I think it's okay if they want to stick around. Then I could just continue. Yes.
Okay. Can you please ask Mataji about the other support needed to homeschool children? My husband works full-time. I'm in a dilemma whether I can do it alone, managing 2 boys throughout the day. Thank you.
Okay, well, that was exactly my situation. My husband was going to work. He had a full-time job, and I had to manage the children, homeschool them as well. So it can be done just based on my experience. It can be done. Like I mentioned earlier, even if you do half of what they school in school, or even less than that, your children will be ahead, both spiritually and academically. Because like I mentioned earlier, the quality of time that we put in, it's a tutorial system, one-to-one, and it's very effective. Like they have in Cambridge and Oxford, in your own London, they have that. And it's very, very effective, because it's very, interactive. So no matter what you are able, just think like that. So your impetus will be to think why you want to homeschool. If you simply want to homeschool because I think they can be better academically. Well, it's an incentive, but not quite. Even children going to school, they can be very academically inclined, right? So what the impetus should be is that I can give them Krishna, in a way, because it becomes so feasible to give them Krishna, and you don't want them to learn the values in the outside world. If you are convinced about that, that's what worked for me, is that I want to pass on these values to them in a way that I can make them better than me, so your motivation has to be correct, then you will be able to take up the challenges. Otherwise, I know many, parents who have taken up homeschooling and they've given up after a couple of years or even less, so.
Wonderful. And I think that answers the other questions too. So does anyone want to ask any last questions out loud? Okay, so I think we'll bring the session to a close. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So heartened by your responses and really inspired by how selflessly you've given more than 2.5 hours of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will make the recording available, and in the meantime, you can unmute yourself and just say thank you to Mataji if you'd like to express your appreciation, and we'll end the recording there. Thank you so much, Mother Aruddha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mother.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hari Bol.